will be panning out, and of course what will be happening in Parliament with regard to the vetting of the Cabinet Secretary nominees. All right, but first let's begin with those stories. And Senate will today afternoon consider a motion that seeks to deliberate on the state of affairs and propose reforms at the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. The motion's endgame will result into the overhaul of IEBC, as Duncan Kaemba reports.
The motion to debate the state of affairs and the need for reforms at the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission has been introduced by Nyandarua Senator John Methu. The motion is targeting the removal of 4 IEBC commissioners led by Vice Chairperson Juliana Cherera, Irene Masit, Justus Nyang'aya and Francis Wanderi over their decision to distance themselves from the announcement of the final results of the 2022 presidential election, stating that their actions were deliberate and a concerted effort to subvert the sovereign will of the people through obstructing the constitutional mandate of the Commission, which goes against their official duties and oath of office. That as a direct result of the conduct of the quartet, the country was plunged into a state of disquiet and uncertainty that resulted in questions being raised on the legitimacy and legality of the results and integrity of the electoral process. It further adds, noting that 4 commissioners did not provide information or evidence to substantiate their accusations, the 4 attempted to defeat the sovereign will of the people of Kenya, espoused in Article 138 of the Constitution. In his motion, Senator Methu is seeking to have Senate condemn actions of the 4 commissioners, calls upon IEBC to effect legal, policy, and institutional reforms recommended by the Supreme Court ruling on the presidential election, and that Senate's Justice and Legal Affairs Committee introduces legislation that will seal existing loopholes in the electoral process, including the manner of appointing of future IEBC commissioners, and enhance the statutory and regulatory framework, especially to separate policy and administrative remit of IEBC. Thursday's motion will likely spark political fireworks in the Senate, reviving political wars between Kenya Kwanza and Azimio la Umoja coalitions on the presidential election, given that it was a tightly contested race that saw only 233,000 votes separate President William Ruto and Raila Odinga, with the Supreme Court discarding a petition filed to challenge the win. The targeted removal of 4 commissioners also will result into a complete overhaul at IEBC, with its chairman Wanyonyi Wafula Chebukati set to exit in January after presiding over 2 general elections, and also his 2 trusted wingmen, Commissioners Boya Mulu and Professor Abdi Gulie, are said to have applied for the PS positions, signaling their clear intention to exit the ever-troubled electoral agency. Duncan Kaemba, NTV.
Well, the president, that's William Ruto administration, has no plans to scrape the new CBC curriculum. This assurance was made yesterday by the Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua, who sought to allay fears by some parents on the future of about 10 million children currently at various levels of learning under the new system. Gachagua was speaking at the unveiling of the Presidential Working Party on Education Reforms, whose mandate will be, among other things, to find out the challenges the system is facing and get feedback from Kenyans before offering best solutions. As Leila Mohammed reports, the team will be expected to also give guidance on transition to higher learning.
The previous political pronouncements by members of the Kenya Kwanza team during the presidential campaigns seemed to indicate that once in office, President William Ruto would make critical changes in the education sector that would change the course of learning for just about 10 million children currently studying under the CBC system.
The CBC is not being repealed. What this good team is doing is to look at it, get the views of stakeholders and the people of Kenya to keep and improve what is good and to address challenges of where there could be weaknesses for our children.
The head of state himself, during his inauguration, noting that whilst the curriculum has had its fair share of challenges, he would form a task force to review education in the country in its totality.
Most of these responsibilities cover aspects of curriculum implementation, access to quality education, education financing, governance, teacher preparations, and so on, among others.
His Excellency the President, in doing what he has to do, more specifically with the basic education sector, can we go into the unknown, get results, analyze them, and take them to him? Don't start from an answered point of view, where now you are working from what you want to bring to him.
Over the last decade, the government has been looking into the issue of basic education, but now with the new education sector task force coming into force, many in that sphere are now calling them to look at the university education sector and higher education learning that they feel is ailing the most.
The university is the apex of knowledge, creation and dispersal, and thus is essential to sustainable development of any nation.
We have people asking for universities to be created for political reasons, people who don't even know what a university is. I want to see whether you are bold enough, because the universities are dying because they are underfunded and they are thoroughly fragmented.
The Education Working Group has been asked to find the best practice in which the demands of industry and concerns of the community must resonate throughout university facilities and reflect in its outputs.
The operational policy and legal framework across the entire education and training sector must be rationalized. We therefore look forward to receiving and implementing your clear recommendations for the overdue appropriate review.
Leila Mohammed, NTV.
Well, the Employment and Labour Court has temporarily suspended the establishment of the Office of Chief Administrative Secretary in the Public Service. The order was issued by Justice Monica Mbaru in a petition filed by the Law Society of Kenya challenging legality of PSC's decision to create the CAS position. Rukia Bule has more.
The High Court has temporarily barred President William Ruto and the Public Service Commission from establishing the Chief Administrative Secretary CAS positions until a case filed by the Law Society of Kenya is heard and determined. This comes as PSC invited Kenyans to apply for the position of CAS in the public service. The Commission had last month called for public participation in compliance with the court order that declared the position unconstitutional. Meanwhile, the Public Service Commission on Wednesday commenced interviews for 585 candidates shortlisted for principal secretary positions. 59 candidates were scheduled and interviewed. Fazul Mohammed, former chair of NGO board, former Kakamega governor running mate Dr. Beatrice Muganda Inyangala, former nominated MP David Ole Sankok, Benjamin Tayari, former MP Kinango, and Mary Chebukati Wanyonyi, wife to IBC chairman Wafula Chebukati, are among those who faced the panel today. The PSC sat in 5 panels to hasten the interview process, with each session lasting half an hour. Earlier, PSC recalled a list of 477 candidates before issuing a new list of 585. Some have pointed this to be of political affiliation. However, Sankok, who was part of the 108 members who were added to the list, refuted these claims.
I told you, and I will still insist, that the PSC is a professional and independent institution that have carried out interviews, and the best man or woman will emerge from these interviews, and whether you supported Kenya Kwanza or supported the other political outfit.
The Commission said it had reviewed the number of shortlisted candidates to accommodate marginalized minority groups, the youths, people living with disabilities, and gender. After the completion of the interviews, PSC will recommend successful applicant names for nomination by the President. before the names are submitted to Parliament for vetting by House departmental committees for approval by the House. The Commission is expected to finish interviewing the shortlisted individuals on October 22nd. Rukia, Bule, NTV.
And the stage is now set for the vetting of the Cabinet Secretary nominees next week after the National Assembly on Wednesday approved all the members to the House Committee on Appointments. A section of legislators have called on the committee members and members of the House to diligently scrutinize the qualifications of the nominees and avoid being used as a rubber stamp by the executive during the exercise.
Next week, the Committee of Appointments of the National Assembly will commence the vetting of the 22 Cabinet Secretary nominees to decide on who is qualified or not qualified to join President William Ruto's cabinet. Members of the House unanimously approved all the 15 members to the Committee of Appointments. Some of the members are legislators Mishi Mboko, Junet Mohamed, David Kosing, Naisula Lesuda, Caleb Amisi, David Gikaria, and Ferdinand Wanyonyi.
And so when we are looking at the cabinet secretary that will deal with internal security, I want the team to look at a person that will come with innovative way of dealing with the issues of its security, Madam Speaker.
But when we finally embark on addressing the issues to deal with individual persons, we must not lose sight of the dictates and requirements of the Leadership and Integrity Act, the Public Officer Ethics Act, and the Anti-Corruption and Economic Crimes Act.
If there are any Kenyans out there who have memoranda, who have anything that they would want to submit to the House and the committee to consider during the vetting process, they know they have, I think, until Thursday of this week to be able to submit such memoranda. And I want to assure the country that this committee will consider all memoranda that are brought before the House, and we will be fair and just to everybody. Those who will submit memoranda will have a fair opportunity to be heard or their memoranda to be considered, but also afford those against whose names or persons memoranda have been submitted an opportunity also to be heard and to have their say before the committee.
At the end of the vetting, the committee will be required to table its report on the floor of the House for the legislators to approve or reject it. Besides that, the MPs are now jostling to be members of the various parliamentary committees after the House approves all the members to the Committee on Selection. The committee is charged with allocating members to the various House committees.
On the majority side, in the Committee for Transport, I was just looking at the numbers last night, 79 members desire as their first choice to be listed in the Committee for Transport. And I know it is because of the challenges that members have in their constituencies with roads and infrastructure in our backyards. But I want to assure members.
For a while now, majority of members have been pushing to be members of Transport, Budget, Public Investments and Public Accounts committees, and in committees that will cater for their constituency needs. On the other hand, the Senate has approved all the members nominated by the Senate Business Committee to serve in the various standing committees of the Senate. 4 senators have been approved to preside over the Senate in the absence of the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker. They include Senators Hilary Sigei, Veronica Maina, Abdul Haji, and Catherine Muma. Vincent Odur, NTV.
All right, we now shift focus to matters security, or the lack of it, and the government has issued a 1-month notice to the residents of counties along the Kerio Valley to surrender any illegal firearms. The notice covers the counties of West Pokot, Baringo, Turkana, Samburu, Laikipia and Elgeyo Marakwet counties, failure to which the government will forcefully disarm them. Further, the government, through the Elgeyo Marakwet County Commissioner Abdirizak Jaldesa, says all chiefs from the region will be tasked with identifying criminal elements within their locality and assist the Ministry of Interior clear the region of bandits. In the meantime, the government has intensified its operations in Tiaty constituency, even as the Council of Elders from the communities in Tiaty asked the government to carry out the security operations and respect human rights.
Wahalifu wametumia hiyo fursa ya small arms kupiga majirani zao, kuiba mifugo, kuiba wanyama na mali, na pia watu kutoroka katika maboma zao contact. Lakini yale ambayo tumepata kupitia Yari is already 36 firearms in a period of 4 months.
All right, and before we get into the dailies, let's just take a look at what's in our news diary today. And day 2, the Parliamentary Service Commission interviews for PS's jobs. And the CBC Working Party Induction Workshop will be happening today. Governors and deputies are also retreating in Naivasha. The Mumias Workers Union Special AGM is happening, and senators are expected to discuss the motion on IEBC commissioners. So those are the stories that are in the news diary today. Now, we will be getting the newspapers right now. We'll begin with the Daily Nation, and before that, of course, I'm not alone. I will be discussing these issues with my panelists. And just joining me right now is Martina Swiga, advocate of the High Court. A very good morning.
Good morning.
Karibu sana.
Asante.
And a lot indeed to talk about. So much has happened, in fact. We'll begin with the Daily Nation. Let me get this correct. So this is what we have on the very front page of the Daily Nation, Off the Hook. And you have a number of faces there. DPP Nurdin Haji has dropped criminal charges against Ruto-allied top politicians and former government officials, some of whom are eyeing plum cabinet jobs, raising questions about the independence of his office. That's on page 7. You're seeing a number of faces there. Mithika Linturi was facing sexual assault case. You have Moses Lenol Kulal, a 90 million graft case. Aisha Jumwa, another fraud case. You also do have Ben Chumo there, the 400 million fraud case. But this is what we have, and LSK wants the judiciary to compel the Director of Public Prosecutions to give the reasons for withdrawals. I don't know. What is your initial, concerns about this particular issue? Martina, yes.
Oh, good morning, first of all.
Good morning.
So the issue here is that the DPP is withdrawing these cases, and yet there is no valid reason that has been given by himself, and I don't believe there is a consent by court to withdraw. And the Constitution is very clear that he should have the consent from court to withdraw these matters. But you can see that earlier on in the year, there was publishing in the newspaper, I think it was in the Star, apologies, I think it was in the Star, when the Director of Public Prosecutions on the 11th of April 2022 published a notice that he would no longer be preferring graft charges on politicians. So I think he's just implementing his notice. But then again, is this a constitutional move? Is it to the benefit of the public? Or is it to the benefit of political alliances? Like, to whose good is this benefiting? Because then have the courts been wasting their time trying to deliberate and deliberate evidence and see if actually these people are guilty or not?
Right.
But these are matters of public policy, and I believe the LSK is right by saying that the DPP ought to give reasons for withdrawal.
Right.
But I think the DPP is just acting according to his own directives, where he said he's not going to prefer graft charges to politicians.
But many people are actually reading a lot of politics into this.
Yes. There's a lot of politics because most of these people are political aspirants. And why is it that it is only politicians who are going to be excluded from graft? And yet they're the ones who are the custodians of most of our funds.
Correct.
Yes.
All right. And we'll be getting much deeper into that. Still on the Daily Nation, Gachagwa's good news for teachers and on transfer policy. Now, teachers who were transferred under the delocalization policy, which took them away from their home areas, will be given an opportunity to apply for review pledges DP Rigathi Gachagua as he launches the CBC review team. That's at the very back page of the Daily Nation. Just moving on, he died because I'm poor, says mother of boy injured in the head. Hospital says 2-year-old died as doctors prepared to operate. This is a story of a lady, a 29-year-old lady, Judy Muthoni, who lost her baby, and it's a complete report there by Simon Suri. Very interesting to just note that, you know, the whole time the 29-year-old mother was sitting on a wooden chair outside her one-room walled house in the village in Kiambu County, that is in Dula. She breaks down every time she's asked about the events of Monday this week when one of her 3 boys hit his youngest brother, Travis Maina, a 2.5-year-old baby, with a fork djembe on the head, eventually leading to his death. And she says, my son was talking all through. His last request was water. Maina was playing with his 2 brothers, aged 8 and 6 years when the accident happened. The 3 were playing under a mango tree just outside the house when the uncle, Hussein Njaya, had a scream from one of the older boys. A very unfortunate and shocking report there. Okay, so just moving on away from that as well, for those fans of Franco Luanzo and his funds mark 33 years since his death. Another report there. This year, the event has been devoid of any sorrow as fans relive the joyous memories of the guitar wizard. They call him the guitar wizard. All right, let's move on. This is on the 4th page of the Daily Nation. Party leaders' dilemma as MPs fight to sit in lucrative House committees. Now, the leadership in both coalitions are worried by the stream of requests from members to place them in particular teams. Now, in most 200 members of parliament, which is more than half of the House, wants to sit in the budget and transport committees, highlighting the scramble for House panels perceived to be lucrative. Some 100 MPs from the Azimio la Umoja One Kenya Coalition Party are eyeing the powerful Budget and Appropriations Committee against only 12 slots available for the coalition. Some 79 MPs from the Kenya Kwanza Alliance have also expressed an interest to serve in the Transport Committee against only 8 slots available. And this is where you have the leadership from both of the coalitions expressing concerns at the high number of requests they have received from members to place them in particular committees. Now, apart from the budget and transport, other committees that have attracted a high number of MPs are health, energy, public accounts, finance and planning, and water and irrigation. Very interesting to see how the number, I mean, 200 members of parliament, that's more than half of the members of the House and want to sit in those particular committees. Also joining us this morning is Lydia Mathia, Policy and Governance Advisor. Thank you so much. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right. So, you know, you've come in right now, maybe just to weigh in on this particular matter. What do you think?
I think
why is there such a scramble for these, you know, positions within the committees?
I think some of those committees are very influential in terms of the role they get to play in oversight, in resource distribution.
Right.
And as you know, politics especially is about being able to pick as much as possible for your people. So MPs view being in the budget committee is one of those things where you can really be strategically placed to push a few projects in your corner, in your constituency.
So it's very lucrative.
So it's very lucrative, and it's very good for them because the more they are able to take to their constituents, the higher their chances of getting re-elected and those kinds of things. I think that's why there's a lot of scramble for things like the budget committee.
You have the transport committee also attracting quite a huge number of members of parliament.
Because that's where big budgets are allocated.
Right.
But I think they need to be a little attentive to the UDA manifesto, because the UDA manifesto is also likely to invest in other areas such as agriculture, such as trade, such as the SMEs. So perhaps committees that have previously not looked very lucrative might end up becoming very lucrative. Things like environment are going to be very important, climate change issues. So perhaps they need to widen their scope, be more familiar with the president's vision so that they don't all cram to the traditional areas.
Right.
And perhaps this administration might not be investing as much, for example, in infrastructure the way the previous administration did. So if I was them, I'd broaden my scope.
All right, Martina, let me get your views as well from what we're seeing in Parliament right now. Remember, there are actually new committees. The 12th Parliament changed the standing orders of the National Assembly, increasing the number of committees from 33 to 43. The outgoing MPs also created 7 new committees, which will see the number of rise to 41 from 34. However, they did reduce the membership of departmental committees from the previous 19 to 15, but the membership of the Budget Committee was retained at 27. You have the Public Accounts Committee and the Public Investments Committee also retaining their 23 members each. I don't know, what do you think of this?
I really agree with what she has to say. It's high time that that our members of Parliament would want to broaden their perspective, and it's good that the committees have risen, because maybe now we are going to be looking at areas that had not been looked into before, and that then means that this new administration is trying to change the narrative or trying to make sure that there is more coverage so that we can be able to have a wholesome government at the very end. So I agree with what my
panelist
says,
right.
And it is a very good move that they have increased the number of committees. I feel like we're going to see change, and I hope the change is not only going to be on paper, but it's something that we're going to be able to see even as
we move forward.
All right.
All right, and also joining us this morning, Ruth Ambogo, policy and governance expert, a long time. Karibu sana, Ruth.
Asante sana.
All right, so we're having a discussion. We'll get back to our biggest story, which is at the very front page of the Daily Nation. It's certainly what we'll be discussing much deeper. But your thoughts on this particular issue?
Well, first of all, we must understand what role the committees play. And as they have rightfully put it, that, you know, the committees aid in the house of the business, or business of the house, sorry. And basically, I am still trying to settle. So they assist with the business of the house. They assist with the reviewing of legislation. Committees actually also, and I think for me that is where I'm going to focus on the fact that these committees are the ones that are charged with doing special investigations. That in case anything is happening that is fishy in a ministry, in a parastatal, in a government agency, it is committees that are usually charged with the responsibility and duty of conducting investigations. Unfortunately, we might want to really forecast a positive outcome or forecast, positives in terms of what we expect these committees to do. But we cannot run away from the fact that these committees in the past have been used as channels to be able to have members of the committees enriching themselves. We've seen in the past when special investigations are done on special issues such as sugar, we saw what happened with committee members, Committee members were being given money dished out, money was being dished out to them. And I think that's where the question of corruption also comes in. That at what level, how is corruption entrenched at the committee level? And that is why it would explain why it could be one of the reasons why you'd see people really scrambling to be part of these committees. That at the end of the day, they have seen that it's an avenue and a platform for people to make money. That, look, if I am under investigation and I'm coming before a committee, what's the best way to get out of the particular issue that is being investigated or that I am under investigation for? You find a lot of people who appear before committees trying to use unscrupulous ways to get out of whatever it is they're being investigated for. So for me, my hope is that these particular committees this time round will actually stick to their mandate, and that whenever an issue comes before them, for investigation, that they will actually investigate, because at the end of the day, they are supposed to be serving the Mwananchi's interest. And the Mwananchi's interest is to understand, for instance, if there is a scandal within the Department of the Environment, for example, assuming there is one, can they investigate? Because at the end of the day, if funds are lost, a project that would have assisted Mwananchi will have stalled, that in the education sector, if there's an issue that has arisen that requires investigation and the committee members accept to be compromised, then the education system of the country suffers a loss. So I hope they remember that while at the committee level, in as much as they are serving us as members of parliament, in parliament and at the Senate, that at the committee level, they are equally serving our interests as Mwananchi.
All right, let's move forward away from that as well. Let's get to the other page, still in the Daily Nation. Let me move it forward to that side. All right, so this is another story here. All set for cabinet nominees vetting. The National Assembly approving the Committee on Appointments, setting the stage for the vetting of President William Ruto's cabinet nominees, which is expected to start next week. The committee, to be chaired by Speaker Moses Wetangula, was approved yesterday amid calls by lawmakers that Parliament should not be used to approve people with integrity questions. The COA, which is the Committee on Appointments, is expected to table its report on the CS nominees vetting on or before the 27th of October. Now, those nominated from the Kenya Kwanza camp include, let me just name some of them, Belgut MP Nelson Koech, you have Nyeri Woman Representative Rahab Mukami, Dido Raso from Saku, George Murugara, you have David Gikaria, Ferdinand Wanyonyi, Mary Emase, and Rahim Dawood. On the other side, there's Azimio la Umoja One Kenya side, dominated Pokot South MP David Kosing, Abdi Shurie, Mishimboko, Naisula Lesuda, Stephen Mule, and Caleb Amisi. Okay, so this is going to be quite interesting from next week. Lydia, from your standpoint, a Kenyan standpoint, what is that one thing, that key issue you'll be keen on when it comes to the vetting of this cabinet secretary's nominees?
I think for me, what I look for is the conviction that that they can stay the course, because government work is you have to be very persistent in order to achieve results. So something that you have to see from within an individual is that passion to deliver the results that Kenyans are looking for. You don't have to have perhaps the most experience or knowledge in a particular field for the docket that you're going into, but what you need is that leadership acumen. And in leadership, you're looking for someone who is able to inspire a team, and you inspire a team by your own conviction, you inspire a team by your own passion for the job, you inspire a team by your own focus for delivery. And I think that's what I want to see, that fire in the belly. To be able to push an agenda, inside the bureaucracy. Because if you're not able to carry the teams within the ministry, I mean, you will be
what is that one
for about
thing you'd
a year.
want to put to task the members of parliament who will be vetting these cabinet secretary nominees?
For the members of parliament, of course, they need to ask the questions that have to do with delivery. What I do not want to see is definitely sideshows and a lot of posturing, maybe political posturing, trying to advance either an Azimio or a UDA agenda. I think the MPs must remain focused on the interest of Kenyans and what it is that Kenyans wants to see these ministers deliver. So we want to hear what are these ministers' plans, for example, to resolve some of the challenges in the dockets they've been assigned. So critical questions on those areas, things like such as debt when it comes to somebody like the nominee for Treasury. Questions to do with how really does he want to tackle the issue of the money that is borrowed and is not deposited in the consolidated fund. Direct questions like that to be posed to those candidates so that
what about
we
the
can be able
question
to
of integrity?
We can be able to get results. On the question of integrity is definitely something that the MPs have to look into. I believe that that's one of the questions they'll be asking. But we have a problem in this country because of this law on integrity that says until you have exhausted all the channels of appeal, first of all, you cannot be condemned. And also, you also cannot be condemned and heard. You have to first be taken through trial. Otherwise, you must be assumed to be innocent until you're proven guilty, because allegations can always be made. And you've heard the Kenya Kwanza team constantly, I think throughout the period of campaign, saying that there were politically instigated investigations that were instituted. And you've seen now Nordin Haji pulling back some of those cases, saying, there's insufficient evidence, so he doesn't want to pursue these issues anymore. He's pulling them out of court. And so the space is a bit mad. It's unclear to Kenyans what is what. And I think that's one of the things that Parliament really needs to actually interrogate. How is it that how do we handle these cases now that some of the candidates, I think, have some criminal allegations, but those allegations are said to have been politically instigated. What's the way forward? And I think that's one of the questions that the committee will really need to come up with a position on, especially how they will draft the report, the recommendations they'll make to the House in terms of how to handle some of those matters that are before them.
Okay, so Martina, I'll come back to you then. Ruth, you'll give us your take on this particular issue, but we really have to take a break here. The hashtag to use this morning on our social media platforms is MLive on NTV. Talk to us at NTV Kenya at Zainab Ismail. We'll be back and we'll continue with a review of what's in the dailies. Stay with us.
The cost of living is steadily rising across the world, leaving many families struggling to make the ends meet. I'm in Nairobi to assess the impact and find out what African governments can do to address the problem.
I am Nadia Karimu, a Togolese, a fashion designer. I ventured in the traditional West African huts for chiefs to avail a rare product to Africans who have a desire to convey something that will enhance their appearance.
I mean, I've been here, 20 years, and it really feels like I've just got here.
Francis Apofo, a Ghanaian-born former professional boxer, retired to practice poultry farming in the UK.
Crystal Rivers Residences along Mombasa Road comprises 3-bedroomed apartments, 3-bedroomed and 4-bedroom townhouses. The only mixed-use development close to the Nairobi Expressway. Easy payment plans available. Terms and conditions apply. Call 0757-620-202.
Unajua deadline ya ku-update details za line yako inakaribia? Safaricom imekurahisishia mambo. Sasa unaweza ji-updatea maelezo yako chini ya dakika 2 kwa website ya www.safaricom.com/account/KYC upload, au utembelee duka la Safaricom au agenti wa M-Pesa karibu nawe ukiwa umebeba kitambulisho au pasipoti yako original ili usajiliwe kabla ya tarehe 15 Oktoba mwaka huu. Epuka kufungiwa laini. Safaricom. Transparent.
Learn in a minute. Brought to you by Nivea Lumina 630 Anti-Dark Mark Serum.
Dark marks on my face? What causes them? Yet I've tried everything. Hello, my name is Emma and this is Learn in a Minute. Dark marks are caused by different factors such as sun exposure, skin inflammation, for example, acne breakout, aging, or hormonal imbalance, leading to melanin imbalance and appearance of dark marks on the face. Let's start with dark marks from hormonal imbalance. It mostly affects us ladies and can be in the form of hyperpigmentation during pregnancy, where a lady's skin complexion completely changes. But panic not. Solution iko. You need a serum that regulates this hyperpigmentation and also prevents any reappearance. I'm thinking Nivea Lumina 630 Anti-Dark Marks. It starts working from day 1 with visible results in just 2 weeks. My name is Emma and this is Learn in a Minute.
Learn in a Minute. Brought to you by Nivea Lumina 630 Anti-Dark Mark Serum.
Nivea Lumina 630 works from day 1 with visible results in just 2 weeks and 71% dark marks reduction in 12. Join the 1 million women already using the #1 Lumina 630 from Nivea.
Set up the place. I'm going to talk to Gabrielle.
Are you sure you're ready for this?
I don't want the truth to come out.
What if we make Bianca come out as an aggrieved warrior princess? We play the sympathy card. Let's make it look like Gabrielle left or cheated on her.
Don't you feel sorry for your own son?
That's exactly why I hid from him all these years. I didn't want him to see me as his mother.
Victoria, your husband left you for good. I'm the only one who loves you.
Whatever you do, I will never love you.
Forever my love.
Protect the ones you love with the power of Dettol bar soap. It cleans and protects from up to 100 illness-causing germs. So no matter what type of mum you are, trust Dettol.
Dettol celebrates Global Hand Washing Day.
Soil Merchants is offering you the opportunity to own a residential plot in Ngong, one of the fastest growing towns near Nairobi. Get an 8-acre plot for only 595,000 shillings inclusive of title deed. Join us on our open day on 15th October 2022.
All right, thank you for staying with us. You're watching M Live on NTV. Talk to us. The hashtag we're using is M Live NTV. We're continuing to take a look at what's in the dailies. This is on the 5th page of the Daily Nation. All set for cabinet nominees vetting, and that's the National Assembly, which approved the Committee on Appointments yesterday, setting the stage for the vetting of those nominees expected to begin next week. I was coming to you, Martina. You know, from your own standpoint, what is that one thing you'll be extremely keen on when it comes to the vetting process from next week?
Before I even make my statements about the vetting process, we were talking about integrity.
Correct.
On our leaders. But the real question is, are Kenyans really concerned about the issue of integrity on leaders? Because history, and I'm not only talking about these past concluded elections, we almost always never choose people who have integrity standards according to Chapter 6 of the Constitution of Kenya. I think the more integrity questions you have, the higher your chances of being elected in better positions. So I don't think integrity is an issue. It's more or less an academic exercise where in law school we are taught about integrity and we have it in the Constitution and it is not going to be amended. But on the ground, actually, that is not, I don't believe that is the case. So whether or not this vetting process is going to consider integrity is a matter that is neither here nor there. What I'm looking forward in the cabinet nominees vetting process is them being able to say what they're going to be able to do for us and actually put it into action, not just making statements out of the blue or having or saying things to push their political agenda, and also people who are going to be able to be independent and work for the betterment of our nation. We are an injured nation, even as our president said, and we're looking forward to a time when we're stable. Like, Kenya is a very great nation, but at the hands of the wrong leaders, we can fall in a way that we will never be able to come back up again. So I am hoping to see at least some transparency and some truthfulness in the cabinet nominees, and hoping that even if they assume their positions, they're going to be able to put work, and it's just not because of their speeches, but action.
All right, Ruth.
You know, it's quite unfortunate when my fellow lawyer and probably senior talks and says that, you know, integrity is now just a subject taught in law school. It's not sad for her saying it that way, but it's sad that society has gotten to that point of view, and very sad, even sadder that. It is only a few who actually want to advance that narrative, because right in your private spaces at home, you wouldn't want to tell your child that, you know what, do anything you want to do to become anything you want to become. In every morning when you're waking up your child to go to school, you're telling them, work hard, be smart, be a good girl, be a good boy, you know. Then at what point does it get to when we now start telling people that, you know what, do whatever you can possibly do to become whatever it is that you want to become in society today or tomorrow? It's unfortunate that there is a few people who want to make us believe that we cannot actually get out of that mentality, that integrity is an issue we cannot resolve as a country. Because I will tell you for sure that this time round, if you look at the people who are elected, if you seriously, keenly look at the people who are elected, especially at the MCA level, there was a lot of toppling that went on at the MCA level, where societies were saying that, look, we don't want you, because when you were in power for the past 5 years, you participated in swindling rather in squandering money that was allocated to you for ward development. In certain areas, even MPs were toppled for those very reasons. So let us not be a society that is blind to the changes that are taking place, so that when we come to cabinet appointments, we are not giving chance and room for us to ask the hard integrity questions. Personally, I would want to see those questions actually asked, because when some of those names were mentioned by the president, Kenyans were in awe and were saying, oh my God, how did this person actually make it that particular list? We would want that when they are being questioned, those questions actually come up, because at the end of the day, we will be failing our society if we say that, oh, you know what, because we have been defeated by this question of integrity, let us not even think about it in the first place. Let's just focus on what they will be able to deliver. And by the way, over and above integrity, because integrity, I believe, goes hand in hand with your track record. I would want that over and above the integrity questions, which must be asked, in as much as there's a system, a legal system that prescribes that, you know, you are innocent until proven guilty, what is the role, what is the oversight role of cabinet, or rather of the National Assembly and the Senate, if they cannot be able to ask those questions we are talking about? What oversight will they be playing if they decide that, you know what, now it is upon the courts to decide if you're innocent or guilty? And by the way, it makes me very sad when I see people, for instance, my sister here say that, you know, the DPP had to withdraw these charges, and she now uses the UDA statements during campaigns when they were saying that certain cases were politically instigated. The state capture that these individuals were talking about during their campaigns is the very state capture they would now allow to take place if they do not allow us to ask these questions, if they do not allow the parliament to ask those very questions on integrity. Because state capture, what is state capture really? State capture is a situation whereby the country has been privatized for a few individuals' gain, that, you know, we are gaining from corruption and we are not even going to fight it. And that what we will do is we will pretend and act as if we are fighting it. And for me, when I see the DPP withdrawing some of these cases against some of these nominees in the name of lack of evidence, I ask myself, when the cases were ongoing and when the charges were being placed upon these persons, was it that he was incompetent and he didn't know how to come up with the evidence necessary to prosecute these persons? Or is it that now that he's withdrawing them, that he has vested interests and he lacks what we call independence, and now he's being influenced politically? So these are questions that we must ask ourselves.
But isn't it within his own mandate as an independent constitutional, you know, office holder to make this decision whether to withdraw the case or not?
It is. But you know, now the questions that now come up, which Kenyan would truly ask themselves is, are you trying to tell us that all along, when these cases were ongoing, you really did not see that there was lack of evidence? Because at what point do we decide that there is lack of evidence? Is it when you are now appointed to be on a cabinet list that now we realize you lack evidence? Does it mean that if these individuals were not appointed to the cabinet lists, that the cases would still go on? Those are curious questions that a curious Kenyan would ask themselves.
All right, and we'll be getting into that in a moment when we dissect that issue much deeper. But this is what's in the sixth page of the Daily Nation. DCI boss to be named anytime now. The race to replace Kenya's former head of the Directorate of Criminal Investigations, George Kinoti, reaching fever pitch last evening as the National Police Service Commission deliberated on the list of top contenders that was to be presented to President William Ruto. The number of cases DCI filed under the previous administration continue to collapse in court. The latest in DPP's withdrawal of charges against the former Kenya Power boss Ben Chumo and cabinet nominee Aisha Jumwa. You have a number of faces here hoping to take over: Amin Mohamed, Eliud Lagat, Munga Nyalo. Now, sources say that those seeking the post from an original list of 19 are, or is it 10? All right, let me get that correct. 10, in fact. Our head of the Internal Affairs Unit, Amin Ibrahim Mohamed, there you have it. He's the Director of Reforms at the DCI. Eliud Kipkoech Lagat, the second guy, and the Principal Assistant to the Inspector General, Munga Nyale. Well, there is, however, a push and pull from different quarters within government keen on having some candidates make it to the shortlist in the, in quotes, spirit of regional balance within the leadership of key security agencies. These include the head of public reforms, David Kipkosgei and Senior Detective Nicholas Kamwende. I mean, so this is a very important issue as well in time, and we will be knowing who will be replacing George Kinoti, and the National Police Service Commission has set Friday as its deadline for having that replacement known. Lydia, why is this such an important issue right now?
Of course, it's because of the history of the DCI and the critical role that it plays in first of all, in investigating special crimes.
Right.
I think one of the agencies in this country that Kenyans have a lot of confidence in, really as an institution, is the DCI. That they are crime busters, that they are able to act faster, they are able to trace and track criminals. I think they have quite a few special operations, special branches that are able to really do, some crack units are able to do very meticulous work. So they have a very good reputation. And I think somebody heading that agency is very important. It's very important to Kenyans to see that the leadership of the agency doesn't falter. I think Kinoti, when Kinoti got into office, he went in there with a lot of public support. There was overwhelming confidence in him. But I think somehow, somewhere, I think he lost his footing, and I think he lost a bit of his credibility, but the institution itself, I think, remains a darling to Kenyans, and it is important that we nail it in terms of getting the right person. I think a lot of people are expecting to see a career investigator, a career police officer, somebody who is with it in terms of the latest technology, somebody who is familiar with the newer methods of fighting crime. So of course we are looking for a younger face perhaps, but also somebody who has some exposure to crime fighting. And I think some of those names that are, especially the three names that are fronted there, look very promising.
I mean, look, George Kinoti's approach towards this, how he conducted his agency's operations was quite different. It was visible, it was seen, but then you have the new administration saying, look, we want a man who will be able to just operate quite differently from what we'd seen. What was so wrong in Kinoti's operations?
His operational approach. I think he was okay to come out publicly. I used to appreciate the updates that were coming from the agency in terms of this is how we are conducting this operation, this is how we are pursuing these particular criminals. But I think to some extent, especially for some of those high-profile cases, he did come off a little bit sensational. I think some of the corruption cases, I believe there was that murder of the gentleman from Israel. What was his name?
Yes,
Bob Cohen.
Yes.
I think that's one of the ones that it was a bit sensational. The other one I believe is the one for Kenei. I think he was telling us about the gun and where the splatter is supposed to go and those kinds of things. And I think to some extent you'd wonder, I mean, if you're going to tell the criminals exactly where you're going to be looking and the things that you're going to be analyzing, I mean, are these people, are you not giving them some kind of roadmap on how to cover up their tracks and where to hide and those kinds of things? I think that he overdid it. I think there's a middle ground that he could have established. I think he got carried away. You remember when he paraded IEDPs again along Kiambu Road, to come and report, I don't know, cases from way back in 2007. I think that even earning him a reprimand from His Excellency the President at that time. So I think he went too far with it. I think we expect somebody who is a little bit moderate, come to Kenyans with information when it is important. Always, I think it's better to have somebody communicating on behalf of the agency instead of just yourself all the time, because just in case there are issues, also you have some measure of deniability. And also some mysteriousness to yourself. You don't want to just become a very common face when you're a crime buster, I think.
But doesn't it help to make this person, yes, Martina, doesn't it help to make, this office holder more approachable? Maybe to even aid in terms of some of the operations?
You're supposed to be feared. You're not supposed to be approachable.
Feared?
People should, when they hear your name, they should shudder so that they don't go and start robbing banks. They're like, hey, money will come for me.
Let's hear from Martina.
I want to respectfully disagree with what she's saying. I feel like George Kinoti did the best he could with what he had. He was the director of criminal investigations. It was his mandate to do exactly what he needed to do. And he was also part of Interpol. Now, you see, within the criminal justice system, being an advocate practicing in the criminal law, it is very important for him to put up a front because it came to a point that crime was becoming overwhelming and criminals wanted to act however they want. But we saw a director who was taking charge, and he took charge, for example, during the the unfortunate Westgate bombing. He's the one who actually went there by himself, leading the rest of his detectives to try and get these guys to surrender. I think he did the best he could. And when we talk about the DCI boss needs to have some secrecy maintained to himself, I do not agree with that, because there are parts of the DCI or of investigators that actually require you to have covert affairs. Persons such as, or officers such as the ones in the anti-terror department. The anti-terror department demands that those officers, those investigators, hide themselves. Even by the way they dress, you cannot be able to see, you cannot identify them by their faces because they cover themselves completely. Now that is allowed. But we have a criminal justice system, or we have a criminal a director of criminal investigation who needs to be at the forefront, because he's one of the major players when it comes to the criminal justice system. We have the courts, we have the director of public prosecution, and we have the DCI. Because if there are no investigations, then, and if the investigations are not conclusive, there's no way the DPP will be able to act. So the DCI plays a very integral role in determining what is what turns out to be justice and bringing people to book. So I believe he did the best he could, and I hope that the next DCI boss tries to match up to the speed that George Kinoti put up.
Okay.
Because, yes.
Ruth. Well, I think for me, I'd like to commend Kinoti on his performance when it came to the role he played in the prosecution of political corrupt individuals. And the fact that, you know, without his investigation, quite a number of people who ended up being impeached as governors would not have been impeached. So in terms of the fight against corruption, I remember quite a number of times DPP Nordin Haji would say that it's a concerted effort, you know. I once sat at a forum where Justice Majanja was speaking, and one of the things that, or rather read one of his books where he mentioned, one of his judgments where he mentioned that for corruption to become a fight that is realizable and attainable by our country, then there has to be a concerted effort between all bodies that are mandated with the fight against corruption. And the DCI played a very key role when it came to the success rate that the outgone president would claim in terms of the war against corruption. And I know that as Kenyans, we love to you know, put up blanket statements such as, we lost the fight against corruption, nothing absolutely was done by the Uhuru administration in fighting corruption. And yet for the first time in a president's term, we saw high-profile names being brought to book, even though some of the cases had not been concluded, not necessarily because you know, the DCI had not done its job, but because of the slow and orderous justice process that we also subscribe to as a country. We must give credit where credit is due. That as part of his investigations, as part of his team, that he also ensured was actually very highly trained. Remember, there was a time I think they went to Israel or something like that for some special training. A particular group of DCI members went for some special training in the US, in Israel, just to get special skills, to be able to get the success rate that Uhuru Kenyatta would brag about in terms of what his contribution to the fight against corruption was. And I would like to agree partly with my sister here that, you know, that to some extent there was some sensationalization of certain cases, and maybe this is what would inform the new administration saying that we want a different personality. Remember that every new administration that comes to power comes with its own terms, with its own conditions, with its own style of leadership, with its own way of doing things. And maybe the way of doing things for them when it comes to the DCI position is they want a calm personality. For their own, you know, reasons, they want a calm personality. But we must also say that I wish there is a sort of like a code of conduct required of all DCI officers, that we wish that there is a manual that is established that, you know what, regardless of whoever you are, calm personality or not, this is what Kenyans expect of you as a DCI. For instance, as a Kenyan, I wouldn't want a DCI who conceals everything that he does, you know, that we have no information about what is happening, because it is through information that we understand how far are we against the fight against insecurity? How far are we when it comes to the fight against robbers and the high cases of theft? How far are we when it comes to the fight against banditry in places like Samburu and places like Baringo? How far are we in the fight against corruption? So I would wish that there is a manual that dictates that regardless of what your personality is, this is what Kenyans expect of you as a DCI agent, rather as the head of DCI, that we want this from you. And also, all we want is, regardless of whoever will be appointed to that particular office, let them deliver. Let them pick up from where Kinoti left. Let them do a better job where he did not do a better job. Let them improve on systems that were not improved, because we just want a better Kenya for Kenyans.
All right, let's move forward from that. Okay, so we'll get to the next report. This is what we'll be talking about, so I'll just skip this report for now. Queries as Ruto's allies walk free. Some of the faces there: Mithika Linturi, Ben Shumo, Aisha Jumwa, Moses Kasaine, Lenol Kulal. All right, just moving forward. Another report here, still on the 8th page of the Daily Nation. Fear keeping murdered man's family away. Investigation says Kevin Otieno was shot dead in broad daylight in Utawala by gunmen who arrived in 2 motor vehicles. A report there by Nyaboga Kiage on the 8th page of the Daily Nation. And still moving forward, KCB to probe English Point Marina books after takeover. Ownership audit will determine if more than half of the apartments have been sold. And a report by Brian Wasuna saying the lender is currently free to go through receivership process, including the sale of the hotel. Just adjacent to that, the theft case against ex-PCEA leader, 2 others end after 5 years. And moving forward on another report here that is going to be a key point of discussion: dilemma for Ruto as the Labour Court stops creation of the CAS post. Now, the Public Service Commission yesterday published an advertisement in which it called for applications to the post and gave those interested a 2-week deadline. Now, President William Ruto's plan to retain a bloated executive has run into headwinds after the court yesterday suspended appointments to the Chief Administrative Secretary post. The court order came on a day that the Public Service Commission opened application for the positions, with those interested given 2 weeks from yesterday to submit their applications. And by yesterday, the Employment and Labour Relations Court in Nairobi put the brakes on those plans by the PSC to establish the positions of CAS leader. This has been a conversation for quite a long time in the court, and the question on whether we really do need this position of Chief Administrative Secretary within the executive.
Well, if you ask me now, having experienced the ones who have just finished their term, it is a very important position. Ministers, some of the ministers carry very heavy responsibilities, and they're very, very busy. Remember, a minister is an authorized officer in terms of human resource. A minister is also supposed to keep an eye on a lot of the public, inquiries that are coming into the ministry. Lots of people requiring attention across board, lots of stakeholders, lots of travel, lots of partnerships and engagements that are supposed to happen. I can tell you, were it not for the CASs who were there in the previous term, a lot of stakeholders would have been disappointed just for the lack of that, having that presence of the ministers within the work that they do. And so I can tell you, if you don't have someone deputizing you, and everything is on you to show up, to appear, to defend budgets in parliament, to go and do luncheons and flag off things and go for international conversations at the AU, at the UN, with the East African community. It is very important for these ministers to be deputized, and that is what the chief administrative secretaries are. I wish they could just call them deputy ministers. Perhaps it could be a little easier for the courts maybe to understand what this role is, because I think we had previously deputy ministers, and maybe that's where the confusion gets. But what these CASs do really is to deputize the ministers. And I've seen, for example, my boss, Professor Kobia, who had, for instance, a very heavy docket: Ministry of Public Service, Gender, Special Programs, Senior Citizen Affairs. I mean, you can imagine on a particular day how many requests are on her desk. She couldn't. In fact, she ended up having, is it 3 CASs? Is it 2? I think maybe we had Shebesh and we had Elachi. So it's a critical position. I don't know why there's a big misunderstanding or a big debate about it. We cannot do without it. I think history bears out the position in terms of when it was called the deputy minister. And I think right now, perhaps that's how we need to tune it, so that everybody has an understanding that these are not just people who are just coming in to get onto the payroll, but these are people who carry real responsibilities within the ministries. And I'll also tell you that sometimes ministers don't have the luxury of going around the community, explaining the work that they are doing, and having these CASs who don't have the burden really of this statutory responsibilities that are in the PFMA, that are in the guidelines for the public service. They're a little lighter, so it's easy for them to go out there and explain public policy to Kenyans, be out there communicating what it is that the government is doing, elucidating, you know, perhaps in media and other places, and saying, you know, this is what the government is trying to achieve, having partnerships and working relationships with parliaments, so because they have that liaison role with the committees that oversight these ministers, and it creates such a conducive environment for work. So I think we need to perhaps have a more pointed conversation in terms of these are deputy ministers, these are people who are coming to assist the ministers, and this is the kind of work that they do. Instead of, I think, when it's called the CAS, people just, I think, get a bit lost in it. I hope that the Kenya Kwanza government will appeal that temporary, I think it's a temporary injunction. It's like an interim order. I suspect perhaps it was not inter-party. So perhaps when there's an inter-party hearing, perhaps I think on 24th of October or something like that, once there's a hearing, they will be able to persuade the judges that actually the position should be maintained, should be retained. And I'd also like to urge the Public Service Commission to perhaps consider renaming it and just conceding that really these are deputy ministers. I think it will be easier to, an easy appeal for all the stakeholders, including the courts, to swallow.
All right. Let's hear from Martina from a law perspective as well on the constitutionality of these particular offices, but also looking at the fact that there are concerns as to, you know, the Kenya Kwanza administration is trying to fight and trying to just reduce the cost of living, but also expanding its executive. So that those are also some of the concerns that Kenyans have raised. Why continue and add these, you know, positions within the executive while we're talking about trying to reduce the cost of living, trying to you know, bring down, you know, our budget?
Thank you. I think the LSK in their petition had valid grounds when they were seeking these interim orders from court. They were saying that there's duplicity of functions. For example, now there's no distinction on the function of the CAS and the like what is their function? Has it been prescribed by a law? Has it been prescribed? Is it within the Constitution? And is it going to be for the public interest, or is it for the benefit of the executive? These are some of the issues that the LSK is inviting the court to look at. And I think it is important for us to give the court time to deliberate and determine this matter to its entirety. But listening to what my panelist is saying, since she has been working in the government, and when she says that it is actually a function that is needed within the ministry, then I start to also want to also hear what the people on the ground are saying. Because if they're saying it will ease up the flow of business and take us to a better place, then so be it. But in the event that then we are now getting into worse financial situations because of more positions being put up by the government, then there is absolutely no need for that. The president was very clear by saying that we have an injured nation and we're trying to retrieve or revive the economy. So by reducing some of these positions, which definitely they're going to be earning money, earning money from Kenyans, I think it is time. I think we should let the courts decide and deliberate on it. I believe in our judiciary that they're going to give a justifiable verdict.
All right, Ruth, CAS position. Some say it's just there so that we can reward the loyalists, but is it really constitutionally correct for these positions to be there?
Well, I don't think it exists just to reward the loyalists, because if you look at the list of CASs that Uhuru Kenyatta appointed in the last government, you'd notice that some of them were people who are extremely, okay, well, it's a bit complicated to analyze the Uhuru administration because remember it was a handshake government, But had there been, had Raila stuck to opposition, and then you'd see names such as the likes of, I think Biti Selachi, was she in Jubilee? I don't know. I guess one could say it was set up to reward the loyalists, but at the end of the day, there are people who ended up on that list that were not necessarily anybody's loyalists. Yeah. And second, I would like to agree with Lydia on the fact that CASs are quite necessary, given how heavy any cabinet minister's duties and functions are. It's not even just necessarily people who hold the gender public service and ministries that have probably 3 or 4 functions, but any cabinet minister requires an assistant who, whenever they are invited, especially, I found it very necessary, especially when it came to invitations to public functions. Do you know how many times, how many invitations come to a cabinet secretary's desk to attend functions and events, and people who want to consult with a cabinet secretary, and yet he or she has to oversee responsibilities such as policy, coming up with review of legislation, implementation of the same, monitoring whether the legislation has been implemented. There's basically so many functions of a cabinet secretary. Very necessary. And in fact, as I heard Lydia here speaking about the position, I was thinking to myself, she deserves to be a CAS in this government. Lydia, you do?
Well, you have
she deserves to be one.
Someone who's lobbying for you.
I am lobbying for her. She deserves to be one in this particular government. Because one, she has had experience with working with quite a number of ministers. She's been an advisor to many people. And not just that, I believe she's a young lady who has mentored quite a lot of people. And I've heard that this time round, even in the last administration, they tended to reserve the positions for young people. If it is reserved for young people, then trust me, you will never hear Ruth Ambogo sitting on this panel saying that we don't need CS positions. However, on the legal issue aspect of it, what was at the contention before Parliament, or rather before the courts, was how public participation was conducted on these particular positions. We are not saying that public participation was not conducted, it was, but was it informed public participation? And this is drawing from the Public Service Act, Section 27, which requires that before any new office is created, or upon a request for a new office to be created within the public service, then certain issues must be looked at. For instance, as Wakili has rightfully put it, that is it in line with the functions of that particular ministry? Number 2, the other issues that she has not focused on are the fact that what will be the financial implications of creating that particular office? Number 3, questions such as what will be the functions of that particular office holder? So yes, government did public participation, but they never indicated to the citizens who are participating in the public participation that these are some of the issues that we want highlighted when it comes to reviewing this question of CASs. So basically what the courts are saying is that we are not saying that don't have CAS positions, but we are asking that can you at least in your public participation ensure that the public participation is effective. One of the things that courts have come to appreciate and assert themselves over is the fact that public participation should not just be done for the sake of doing public participation. The reason why we have public participation is to have the input of the voice of the people, so that we all agree and say, fine, we want this done, and we want it done in this particular way. That is why beautiful things like BBI got lost along the way, because public participation was either not done, and if it was done, it was not done in the proper way. So we hope that before these positions are established, and I've seen an announcement for the same, and I will apply. I don't know if they will decide not to choose loyalists, I will apply for one of those positions.
I see.
The announcement came the other day. Lydia and I should apply. Hopefully one of us will be considered. Yeah.
I will wish you all the best on that. Look, but then another question as well, before we move on to the next issue, is basically the fact that in the previous administration, the CAS nominees were never subjected to competitive recruitment. Now, this time the candidates will be facing interviews. Will this solve the problem?
Let me tell you, I am one of the people who really believes that there's a problem. We are having a problem with this issue of Public Service Commission and establishment of offices and their role in all that, and then the courts, what they are asserting, all this process that is supposed to be followed. Look, the president has absolute power, right, when it comes to establishing any office within the executive.
All right.
He shouldn't have to justify or explain himself so extensively where the courts keep injecting the establishment of an office. Let me tell you, for instance, if the president today woke up in the morning and decided, actually, I think I am having a problem in that corner. Maybe I'm having a problem with the Somalis dispute in the maritime, for instance, issue, and I need a special officer, or I need a special technical assistant to help me really figure out that particular problem. And so therefore I'm going to establish a secretariat, you know, an advisor with a few officers to be able to help me with that issue. The president should be able to establish that, because that is what it will take for him to execute his mandate. And I think that the courts need to be a little bit lenient with the executive when it comes to the president's powers to establish the offices that he needs. And that's why I believe that all this going around, I think, like she's saying, well, we should have the faith that the courts will come up with the best outcome. But I think to some extent, I think the judiciary could be overreaching into the executive. Remember, the Judicial Service Commission, for example, which is one that is in charge of the human resource within the judiciary, is chaired by the Chief Justice. So the Chief Justice gets to have complete authority over the hiring and the firing and the moderation of the human resource within the judiciary. The same thing happens in Parliament. You have the Parliamentary Service Commissions. They're chaired by the Senate, by the speakers of the National Assembly and the Speaker of the Senate. So they have complete authority over the human resource. But when it comes to the executive, you have a Public Service Commission that is supposed to be now independent of the president. Ideally, the Public Service Commission should be chaired by the president, or by proxy, perhaps the head of public service or his chief of staff. That is how it should be, so to have complete authority over the people who are the human resource that are working under him. So I think there is a sense in which everybody is getting into the president's space in terms of the space.
I see Martina disagreeing with that.
But let me say, let me say this: it is within the president's powers to appoint you as a minister, and then appoint for you a deputy. I don't think there is anywhere in the Constitution that bars him from appointing deputy ministers for the ministers that he has established. Because if you're told you can appoint 22 ministers, right, and I decide I think you need an assistant, nothing stops him from appointing an assistant minister. And I think that's where we are getting caught up with all this conversation about CASs, because we keep wanting to make it into this elaborate thing. These are deputy ministers. Okay. The president has a prerogative.
Let's wind up on this, Martina, very quickly as you respond to that as we move on.
I just want to respond on the part where she mentions that the courts need to
back off.
Back off. Let us remember that we have 3 arms of government. There is the executive, the judiciary,
and the legislature.
All of them are independent. And the reason as to why they're independent and should perform their functions independently is for the purposes of checks and balances. There is no way, as much as the president, you would say, has absolute power, he cannot act in a vacuum. This is not a dictatorship country. This is a democratic state. And the courts are there to ensure that any person who is aggrieved by any action, whether it is administrative, whether it is a personal issue, you take your grievances to court, and the court makes an adjudication. So this is not the time for the courts to try and loosen up. It is the time for them to show their prowess and their independence. And we want to have an independent judiciary, whereas the judiciary will take into consideration, because they're the custodians of the law, and mostly the constitution of Kenya.
But 2010. On issues of human resource, honestly.
Even on issues of human resources, because it is very possible that the Public Service Commission can act ultra-vires. We have very many public offices that act absolutely ultra-vires and in an abyss of power. And that is when people go to the constitution. That's when people go to courts, such as activists, or even the LSK, or even individuals go to the constitution to try and seek legal redress. So I do not believe that this is the time for the courts to try and back off the president. No. We need checks and balances so that we can actually see a democratic state.
And I agree on checks and balances, but on this issue of CAS, this is judicial overreach. I'm telling you, it is judicial overreach.
When is it that we can declare that something is judicial overreach?
I mean, we can agree to disagree.
Is that even something? Is that even vocabulary that exists?
You understand? You are running your own human resource, isn't it? As a Judicial Service Commission, you're running your own human resource. You're the one who decides. The Chief Justice gets to decide about who hires and who who is fired and who is hired. In the parliament, it's the same thing. You know, the speakers get to decide who is hired and who is fired. But for some strange reason, in the executive, the president's powers to establish offices, you know, is open to all this debate. And that's why I'm saying I believe that one of the best things that the president perhaps can do is to just stop with this conversation with the CASs, appoint deputy ministers direct for these ministers, because he is the one who knows why. And I'm telling you that the deputy ministers are necessary. And you've heard, you know, testimony here from my fellow panelists, my sister here, Ruth, telling you that, I mean, when you look at the docket of a minister, the kind of requests that come for public engagements, you know, they cannot carry, you know, all those engagements and still be able to really pay attention to the delivery and focus on results. So it's very important that these ministers are deputized. And perhaps, that's what I'm saying, perhaps the language of it is why we are getting lost. That we say CAS, administrative secretaries, maybe if we call them deputy ministers, it will be clear to Kenyans that these are people who are coming to assist the ministers to just do their jobs.
Very quickly, Ruth, we have to move on.
I think for me, what we are losing the conversation here when we fail to anchor it in the Constitution, which is that we are under a constitution that dictates. We are under a constitution. Government is under a constitution,
the supreme,
which is supreme.
Where do you write it?
Just a minute.
Where do you write the
which dictates? Allow me to just say this. Which dictates that things need to be done in a particular manner. And part of the Constitution, as a child of the Constitution, we have the Public Service Act, which dictates how things should be done within the public service. And Section 27 of that act dictates how any new office needs to be created. And what we are saying is, we are not saying that the office is bad. What we are saying, we are not saying that the office is wrong, establishment of that office is wrong. We are asking, was the procedure for the establishment of that office followed? It is the same thing as...
The president has the authority to establish any office.
He does, but he has to follow the requirements that have been indicated in Section 27 of the Public Service Act. And unfortunately, those were not followed. So what we are saying is, he can even call them deputy ministers, so long as Section 27 of the Public Service Act is followed to the letter. And what we are saying is also that when we get to a point where we start saying that, oh, you know, the judiciary is breathing down on the executive, we lose the conversation, because at the end of the day, the moment we apply a little laxity in just one of the functions of the president, then trust me, we lose the entire conversation and anything can be done. The thing about systems is,
do you know the thing is, if he had called them advisors, if he had called all these CAS
even if he called them advisors,
you know, right now they've been in office.
Can I tell you something? Even if he calls them advisors, the Public Service Act Section 27 would still have applied, that a new office is being created within the public service that will require resources from public coffers to be allocated to these people.
These advisors are appointed. Then, is it a problem?
Whether you call them advisors, you call them deputy ministers, whatever name you will call them, we are not saying the president has no power to appoint them. The president does have the power, but he has to follow the Constitution and the laws.
All right, look, we will continue this after the break. But before we do take a break, let's just take a look at what's on the front pages of the other papers that we have here. This is what's on the front page of the Business Daily. China fines Kenya 1.31 billion for defaulting on SGR loans. And Nairobi tapped over 500,000 shillings from lenders, and passengers and cargo services unable to meet cost. So this is quite a big report here. Kenya defaulted on the repayment of the Chinese loans provided to build the standard gauge railway, highlighting the country's struggles with the mounting public debt. That is 1.312 billion that the Chinese banks fined Kenya in the year ended June for the loan defaults. This is according to Treasury documents seen by the Business Daily. I know I'll give you an opportunity to speak on that when we come back. Taifa Leo, this is also what's on the front page. What we will be discussing, ufisadi, Haji aosha washukiwa. Tumeangaziwa, tutaondoa kesi dhidi ya Jumwa hadi, and of course the rest. Mkurugenzi wa mashtaka ya umma aondoa kotini kesi kadhaa za ufisadi dhidi ya maafisa na wengi wao wakiwa washirika wa Ruto. All right, and I think we saw that yesterday. All right, so this is what we'll be getting back into. When we come back, also very clear report there on the Standard as well, as we come back to take a look. It says, can we just get that? This is what we have on the Standard. Freedom has come. At least 5 high-profile graft and criminal suspects are off the hook after their cases were lined up for termination by the DPP who literally handed the mostly Kenya Kwanza allies, whose campaign slogan was "Freedom is coming," a major reprieve. But is it freedom? We'll talk about that. We'll be back in a short while. The hashtag we're using this morning is MLiveNTV. Stay with us.
Now this is what we call convergence. Come through for the morning fix this and every single Friday right here on NTV. Yes, it's about that time.
You know, the coolest thing about mornings is that a girl and two guys together in the mix, you never know what to expect. You guys are crazy.
From Friday 6, bring your good vibes, bring your picks. From 7 a.m., it's a dope mix. Every single thing on Friday changes with a morning fix.
Ni maombi tumeona mkono wa Bwana, sio juju. Ni maombi tumeona mkono wa Bwana.
Amjambo wa Kenya. Kwa majina naitwa Justina Siokau, aka Madam 2020. Kupata wimbo wangu wa Ni Maombi, bonyeza *812 *803 hash. Skiza na Nation, supporting local talent.
Dust off your Subaru and upgrade your Lexus, because Coop Bank is now offering 100% financing on used cars. With Coop Bank pre-owned car financing, anyone with an income can walk into a second-hand dealership, select the car that best suits them, and get financing from Cooperative Bank. To find out more, walk into a Cooperative Bank near you for details. Terms and conditions apply.
On my dark marks, I've tried everything from A to Z, even vitamin C, but hardly any results. Nivea Lumina 630 works from day one, with visible results in just 2 weeks and 71% dark marks reduction in 12. Join the 1 million women already using the #1 Lumina 630 from Nivea.
Soil Merchants is offering you the opportunity to own a residential plot in Ngong, one of the fastest growing towns near Nairobi. Get an 1/8-acre plot for only 595,000 shillings inclusive of title deed. Join us on our open day on 15th October 2022.
All right, thank you for staying with us. You're watching M Live on NTV. Time to get into our conversation much deeper. And of course, just focusing on what's on the front pages of our dailies today. And on the Standard, this is what it talks about. Freedom has come. And this is with regard to some high-profile graft and criminal suspects who are now off the hook after the DPP wrote to withdraw those cases. Now, several of these high-end corruption and criminal suspects, it is freedom for them, perhaps, after the DPP applied to terminate their cases. Majority of the accused persons being set free were allied to President William Ruto's Kenya Kwanza camp during the last election and are literally reaping from the coalition's campaign slogan of freedom is coming. But I'll begin with you, Martina.
Yes, please.
Talk to us about this. I mean, I know you mentioned a bit earlier on with regard to how you view this entire issue, but when it comes to the independence of, you know, constitutional institutions like the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, well, it is within his own mandate to say, look, I feel like I do not have enough evidence to charge these people in court, so I will withdraw these cases.
Okay, so under Article 157 of our Constitution, that is where the DPP that's where he gets his powers from. Under that article is the same article that says when and if he decides to withdraw a charge, he must then get consent from the court. The DPP is acting as though he is in a vacuum. He acts by himself. There is no consideration of any other players in the criminal justice system. There is no consideration of the court. There is no consideration of the investigators. There is no consideration of the defense counsel. So what are you saying? That all these people who were charged, we were wasting valuable time in court? Is that then an abuse of court process? This same Director of Public Prosecution has never been seen in any court of law prosecuting even one single case. On the 11th day of April 2022, he came up with guidelines on the decisions to charge. And he then said that he is not going to prefer graft charges on politicians. So if I am an ordinary citizen of Kenya and I happen to be engaging in corrupt activities, and for example, my corrupt activities sum up to 1,000 shillings, does that then mean I will face the law, as opposed to some people who have been given billions and millions of Kenyan money to be the custodian of? I feel like this is a very unfair move. And what is this freedom has come? This is a slogan that was said throughout Africa from the time of independence. It's always a question on freedom. But is it freedom discriminatively? Why are we seeing that there's only freedom on people who are now eyeing for government positions? I am not saying that they need to continue being tried, but the DPP ought to give justifiable reasons as to why he intends to withdraw these cases. Another thing I am really questioning on the competency, because by the time the DPP decides to prefer charges, for a court to accept and admit those charges, he must have gone through what it is the investigators have brought to his attention. And the investigators in this instance, we're talking about the DCI, we're talking about the EACC, we're talking about the Assets and Recovery Agency, we're talking about all these agencies. This whole year, there has been fights with the office of the DPP. Based on issues of his unilateral decision on making policies and coming up with slogans on what he thinks is best. Now, the question we should be asking ourselves, is this to the best of the public interest? Is this to the best of the common mwananchi? Is it to the best of the Republic of Kenya? Because at this time and point, I really think that the new government administration should look into the powers of the DPP and try to make sure that they are consistent with the values and the values that are prescribed in our Constitution. Because now you can see at least 5 high-profile graft and criminal suspects are off the hook. Where were we before the elections? Where was this decision up until now the president announced his potential list of cabinet secretaries? Why did he not decide to withdraw this charge? What new thing has come up that he has decided that, oh, you know what, these people are no longer suspects of graft. If you see the President Ruto is saying he will not spare anyone when it comes to corruption, and then we have a Director of Public Prosecution who has decided to not prefer charges of graft on any politician. From May up to date, there has been no new matter in court of corruption.
All right.
So are they acting together? Is it a conflict of interest? What is happening? Is this for political gain for Nurdin Haji? Because I know he has a security of tenure. Then what is it? Okay. Does that then mean there needs to be reforms within the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution? This is something we need to think about.
Lydia, coming to you, I mean, even as the DPP has essentially the powers to withdraw these cases as given the right within the Constitution, it also puts into question and concerns perhaps as to the Kenya, in fact, President William Ruto's administration on the war on graft.
I believe that President Ruto's responsibility, which is where the executive's responsibility lies, is on investigating crime. That is where the police come in. That is where the DCI come in. They are facilitated. I think you saw him extend the independence of the DCI by allowing them to have an accounting of their own through the police that is not dependent on the PS for the Ministry of Interior. Now, coming to this issue of Nordin Haji, I think my concern of it, I have no doubt that he's a well-meaning Kenyan. I think I've had quite a bit of trust in the DPP myself, just because of how he approaches his work and the level of scrutiny that he applies on files. I think the level of scrutiny that he requires of the EACC and of the DCI before he's able to proceed in court. And I think a lot of the work that you saw him take to court over the period of time would be supported by narratives that he would be able to explain to Kenyans in 2, 3, 4 pages and say, you know, Kenyans, there is this matter. It has been investigated by the EACC. This is the anatomy of the crime that was committed. This was the issue that was done. And he would, you know, he would get into it and say, this is where the breach of trust, and this is where the breach of law happened, and this is why I'll be prosecuting the following persons for the following reasons with the following crimes, all right? So I believe that given the approach that he had taken in taking these cases to court, where he would give this elaborate narrative that would really carry us along in terms of why he has taken these people to court, I believe he should proceed on the same step. And when he's withdrawing a case, and I think this is a mistake that he has done, he should be able to tell us, now, when I went to court to prosecute Ben Chumo, I had gone to court to charge him with the following for these reasons. Now, because of the following developments, either I have lost witnesses, or I have been questioned by the judiciary, which I am not able to conform, or I am not able to confirm. We have these gaps in evidence. Because of these reasons, I am unable to continue to competently prosecute this matter, and have therefore determined that it is no longer tenable, and that is why I'm withdrawing it. I expect these narratives of each of these cases, because that is how he would communicate to us. When he was taking them to court, it is only fair that he does the same when he's withdrawing, and that way there's not this, this gap where we now have to fill with speculation about what the political motivation could or could not be. So he owes it even to himself, to the office of the public prosecutor, in order to maintain the integrity of that office, that justice is also not just done, that it is seen to be done. And the explanations are a critical component of that, and he needs to communicate publicly to Kenyans on the reasons for each of these cases being withdrawn. And I think if the reasons, and I believe that they should be well-founded, you know, Kenya should be able to go right along with him in terms of these issues. Otherwise, just withdrawing and then not saying anything, I think gets us to a point of speculation, and it's not good for anybody. And
I'll get to you, Ruth, in a moment. I promised we'll get, I promised you run that particular report, and of course it is still with regard to the same. The DPP on Wednesday seeking to drop a record 3 high-profile corruption cases, citing lack of adequate evidence. The DPP formally withdrawing charges against one. You have former Malindi lawmaker Aisha Jumwa, that is in a 19 million shilling graft case. Also that of what you've just alluded, Lydia, the former Kenya Power Managing Director Ben Chumo in a 400 million shillings corruption case. Ibrahim Karanja has that report and says that the Nordin Haji-led office has also given clear intentions of withdrawing former Samburu Governor Moses Leonard Kulal's 80 million shilling graft case in a series of alarming withdrawals that are now raising eyebrows. Let's take a look at that quick report. We'll be back.
You still insist that this is a witch hunt?
Yes, it is. And it is drama. It is drama, as you see.
What do you say, sir?
He was driven off.
Characterized by dramatic public arrests and arraignments at their beginnings, the decision by the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions to suddenly drop charges against some of the suspects in high-profile corruption cases leaves more questions than answers. On Wednesday, the ODPP formally withdrew charges against former Malindi Member of Parliament and Cabinet nominee Aisha Jumwa in a 19 million shillings case that involved alleged embezzlement of monies from the Constituency Development Fund, CDF. Jumwa is the only suspect in the case to have charges against her withdrawn. Also having a reprieve from another withdrawal of charges against him is former KPLC Managing Director Ben Chumo, who was let off the hook following ODPP's application to strike out the 400 million corruption case against him. In both Jumwa and Chumo's cases, the ODPP invoked Section 87 of the Criminal Procedure Act that allows a public prosecutor to withdraw prosecution of any person at any time before judgment is delivered. Former Samburu Governor Moses Lenol Kulal could also be on his way to freedom after the prosecution indicated that it intended to withdraw charges against him in an over 80 million shillings corruption case. The withdrawals heightened at such a period, already drawing political attention, with some politicians already reading underhand dealings. Through a communication on his Twitter page, Narok Senator Ledama Olekina suggested that the withdrawal of the cases was politically instigated. The senator said, and I quote, "Clean them all. It is their time to eat," seen to be indicating that the withdrawn cases are of politicians perceived to be in support of the Kenya Kwanza government.
So one, the judiciary is also failing in allowing the DPP to exercise the power of withdrawal of cases without giving some sort of explanation as to why they are withdrawing those cases. Because then what were the courts wasting valuable time sitting in doing if those cases did not deserve to be before the court in the first instance? So it could either be two things. It could either be that the DPP has been intimidated to withdraw those cases, or that the DPP instituted charges against people knowing that he had no evidence to sustain those cases.
Ibrahim Karanja, NTV.
All right, and those were questions there asked by the LSK President, Eric Theuri, of course, putting into question what brought the DPP to that point of withdrawing those cases. Ruth, I mean, when you're looking at that and the question of it being politically driven, does it give credence to the assertions and remarks that were made earlier on that most of these cases were a political witch hunt at the very beginning?
Earlier on, I had said two things could be possible. That at the time at which these cases were coming before the DPP's desk, that indeed there was incompetence in terms of handling these cases. Incompetence in what sense? That evidence that was not evidence was relied upon to prosecute these persons. But you see, the likelihood of that happening is actually very low, because you see how our justice system works. And remember, the DPP sort of has some state prosecutorial powers. How our justice system works is that he who alleges must prove. How our criminal justice system works is that if I allege something, I must prove that whatever it is I am alleging against this particular individual is true. And there were people who went before the DPP's office, or rather there were people who brought up charges and said, these particular individuals are corrupt. These individuals who have now landed on the list of cabinet secretaries are corrupt individuals. So by the time they are alleging, they were expected to prove. And in their proof and you know, in the investigations of the DPP, it was found at that particular time that there was sufficient evidence. It must have been found that there was sufficient evidence to prosecute these personalities. Then how does it become then that when their names, just when their names are on the list of cabinet appointments, suddenly they are innocent? I understand that as part of the prosecutorial powers that the DPP has, they can actually, they have the power to begin to withdraw a case at any particular point within the proceedings. They do have that power. But Kenyans would find it suspicious, and they already do, that why is it that now is when the cases, is when evidence is not being found? And that's where now allegations such as, or rather the assertions that the LSK chairperson is putting forth could actually make sense. That there could have been intimidation from the powers that be. That there could be, that this person, it could also be possible that this, our DPP now is trying to protect his standing with the new government, you know. And it's quite unfortunate, especially for me, because at one point I remember there was a session that the DPP held, and I was privileged to sit at that particular session. And he was talking to us about how his department has worked in bringing down corrupt, top high-level profile cases of individuals who are involved in corruption, and how, you know, the success rate of the DPP. And he even mentioned to us how they operate, you know. At some point, he even mentioned to us that some of the officers involved in bringing down these high-level personalities are officers that have gone for training. I think he was talking about they had gone for an exchange program with Interpol or something like that at the US. It was a public information. If you search for it, you will find it out there. So how then does it become that this very qualified personnel within DPP's office got it wrong? So these are the questions that we must ask ourselves. And it is very unfortunate that in his dropping of these charges, he gives us nothing beyond there was no sufficient evidence. Any Kenyan who reasons with the changes of times, with the changes of political power, would know that this is just somebody protecting his standing with the new government. And unfortunately, this is now the real definition of state capture, whereby when it does not suit the powers that be, we will not fight corruption.
Okay.
That the state capture is another definition of state capture is when we fail to fight the war against corruption because it disrupts the powers that be and how powers that be have organized themselves to benefit from a particular government. And unfortunately, in as much as my sister Lydia would like to say that, you know, there was political involvement or rather political influence in the prosecution of some of these individuals, I would not want to agree with that because, I mean, come on, there was evidence that, and I wish we can now review that evidence,
but evidence
to
that
ask ourselves.
Right now does not hold water for the cases to continue.
And that is why now I'm saying there is need to review that evidence to ask ourselves, really, is that evidence, does it hold water or not? If it doesn't hold water, then by all means let these people be cleared so that we don't become a country that states that, you know, we do not become people who are seen to be curtailing people's dreams and goals of becoming cabinet secretaries in the name of politics.
Let me say this. Let me say this. First of all, I am not defending corruption and saying that people, you know, are being prosecuted politically. I'm not the one who is asserting that, okay? I mean, just because of the space that I've operated in, I'm privy to a few things here and there, and I can tell you that, I mean, the administration that was not perhaps sanctioned or, you know, there were overzealous people who were really machinating, you know, and one of the tools that they used to machinate, intimidate, and force people into the Azimio coalition, for example, was to use the criminal justice system, all right? And in fact, a lot of the cases were never brought because they were only used for intimidation. Unaambiwa tu wewe zina bota nikwambie, if you dare continue picking so-and-so's calls, you just know.
Yeah.
I think you've heard this phrase, people say, mtu akija kukutafuta atakupata.
Yeah.
You know, if someone really looks for you, you know, they will find you. If there's something that they want to bring and make a mountain out of a molehill about, you know, someone will really do it. So we cannot also run away from that reality. But let me say this. It is better that the guilty go free than we have one innocent person persecuted and unfairly, okay? Remember, this is the same DPP who has gotten us a conviction out of Waluke, okay? That Waluke has gone and stood on Azimio, okay? Become an MP with I think a UDA, with an Azimio ticket, and then still lost his appeal in the Court of Appeal. So this is the same DPP. So let's also look at it from a general perspective, all right? So it is not that that he's doing the wrong thing. What he's doing wrong is that he's not explaining himself. He's not explaining himself to the courts sufficiently, and he's also not explaining to Kenyans, as has been his tradition, to tell Kenyans, I am prosecuting this person for the following reasons. If he could do that, and I wish he could do it. So I think that's where my question mark is. Why are you not able to give us these elaborate narratives that you have usually done about why you're taking this person to court and why you're now removing them from court? If you could do that, then I think he'll be able to carry us along. But I do not believe that Nodine's his motivations are just automatically impure just because
but
you must find
his motivations may not be impure, but his actions are, respectfully to say, incompetent. Because it is very clear, okay, if you're going to, for example, if we look at the Waluke case, He was convicted, isn't it? It is the court that made the judgment to convict him. Why then didn't he let these people who have been in court for almost 5 years, such as the KPLC bosses, they've been in court for 5 years. Why could he then not let the court to decide whether the evidence was enough to convict or to set free, you know? Because then he's emptying every other criminal justice player system. He's emptying every other person who is in the criminal justice system. He's emptying the roles. So what then does the court have to do?
But let me ask you this question from where you stand as a lawyer. I mean, when you have the DPP sort of admitting that there was no substantive evidence to charge these people in court, does it in any way, you know, abuse or say anything about the criminal justice process?
All I'm saying is right now, the criminal justice system, unfortunately, it is not integrated. And it is because players like the DPP acts by himself. He does not consult the investigators because it is, even if he has been having wrangles with the DCI, the DCI is not the only investigative body in Kenya. We have the EACC, we have the Assets and Recovery Commission. Like we have so many other bodies that have been established that carry out investigation. If it is a witch hunt, as some of the politicians have been saying, then why not let the courts decide? Because the judge who's sitting there ought to be independent to see the evidence that has been presented by the prosecution weighed against the evidence of the defense team, and then make a deliberation and an adjudication of the same. Why is he acting prematurely? You know, that is the question.
Let me tell you.
Allow me to finish.
Okay, let her just finish, then I'll give you a chance, Lydia.
You see, the whole of this year, there has been questions about his competency and his integrity towards the office of the Director of Public Prosecution. Remember, this is the office that is mandated to carry out all prosecution matters in the Republic of Kenya. If we have him coming to just free and only free those who have political aspirations, what does that then say about the common mwananchi? You can see the Aisha Jumwa cases. There are many other co-accused. Why only release Aisha Jumwa? I'm not against her being released.
I think the main question here, and a lot of people are raising it, specifically those within the human rights and governance space, is the timing of
Yes, the timing. Why is it that he's doing this now? And as I had said earlier, he had already made a decision this year that he's going to make sure that the politicians are covered discriminatively against the common mwananchi. I'm talking on behalf of the common mwananchi. When we go to these criminal law courts, we can very well see that the DPP has preference over people who are political aspirants. That is very clear. It has always been clear. Even in his decisions to charge, even in his guidelines for terrorism, in all the guidelines he has formulated, which most of them are in court subject to adjudication. But all I am saying and all I am appealing right now is that the new government ought to put checks and balances over this office. Otherwise, we are going to lose the essence of having a criminal justice system. And me being a criminal lawyer and a very like at the initial stages, it is very unfortunate that right off from school, you come to learn that when you come to practice, this is what is being practiced. It is a huge joke.
Okay.
Zainab, let
yes,
me
Lydia,
say
then we'll get Lydia.
I mean, this is said all the time. You know, justice must always be seen to be done. Okay, so certainly it does look suspicious. Okay, that certain cases are being withdrawn while others are not being withdrawn. Certain people are being released, and the same other people on the dock are not being released. But I'll tell you this, and I think I've observed the struggle of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution. When he was working in this ecosystem that has been there previously. And you could see that he was making an attempt to assert his independence because I think he was feeling like he was not able to be on the same page with other players in the criminal justice system, the DCI and those other people. And I think that's why he came up with this standard, this policy. And I think that policy was established after a lot of these cases had already been taken to court, right? This policy, the decision to charge policy.
But did he do it by himself?
No,
or did he consult
that document,
other players?
if you look at the launch, when that decision to charge policy document was launched, you could see all the actors in the space actually were there at that function. And I think this is one of the, perhaps the hopes, that Kenyans we can have. We can say, maybe going forward, let's make sure that all of us are on the same page in terms of the threshold, that is met before the prosecutor goes to court or makes a decision to charge, so that then you're able to sustain a case that is in court. Because if you're not able to have that evidence at the preliminary stages, you'll not be able to sustain a case in court. And I think that's what the office of the prosecutor was doing, trying to come up with this standard, so that going forward, the cases that are brought to him, the evidence that is brought to him, everybody's on the same page. That this is a standard you must meet. That way, I'm able to sustain. Otherwise,
but
somewhere along the line, I'll have no choice but to withdraw.
Is he a practitioner of these policies he's coming
Let
up
me tell you, of
let's
course,
hear from Ruth, because we are running out of time
Let
as
me
well.
just finish.
Right, yes,
it does raise issues in terms of how then these people are taken to court. Yeah, either way, this end or this other end, there's a problem. Yeah, whether it's that he's making a decision to withdraw while there's evidence, or he went to court without evidence, then these people are entitled to some kind of recourse. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of these gentlemen and ladies actually sue the state for damages or compensation, for ruined reputations or those kinds of things, because, why did you take me to court, therefore, if you therefore are now admitting that there was no evidence to take me to court, I wouldn't be surprised if some of them seek some kind of redress.
Ruth, even as we wind up, I think the bigger question would also be, the new administration's commitment in the war on graft, and specifically also the independence of these constitutional offices. We have the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, you have the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. I mean, this is one of the main areas now I think Kenyans should be focusing on.
Yes, I agree with you. And there's another section, there's another independent body we've forgotten to talk about, this whole conversation about corruption, which plays a key role in either ensuring the fight against corruption is won or defeated. The final body, which is the courts.
Right.
Are we forgetting that just a week ago, we had some Azimio-affiliated members who had alleged corruption cases now that had been concluded by the courts being brought back to FOI, that apparently there was new evidence that had been found. So you see, for me, when I hear such cases, I ask myself, are the courts truly independent? Do we have now, are we seeing a new case of interference from the executive to the judiciary, that in as much as the Kenya Kwanza Brigade promised during the campaigns that they would ensure that, the judiciary is funded, that it has independence, when we start seeing cases of Azimio, allied members of parliament or former members of parliament, or, people who are now retired from politics, being brought back to court, that, there is new evidence that we have found and we find you culpable. The question becomes, where is the independence of these institutions? And it's quite unfortunate that all these things are happening in less than the first 100 days. This sets the tone, unfortunately, for the government. It sets the tone for what kind of policies we are going to see, what kind of governments we are going to see. And sadly, as I end, it tells us that state capture is here to stay, and now even more redefined, unfortunately.
Lydia doesn't agree, but Lydia, we don't have time to continue, but I promise we'll be having this conversation again. I'll call you and then we'll continue. Just a quick comment here on Twitter. I'll just mention one. Josh Chambi saying, we must establish a non-compete environment between government agencies. DCI prosecutes, DPP dismisses the case. When DCI and DPP agree, the courts dismiss the charges. So where are we getting at? Okay, so this is what some of the questions that Kenyans are asking. And of course, we'll continue this conversation. We'll be seeing how the next few days will be panning out, and also looking at those key issues that are happening in the country. Thank you so much for being part of this discussion. We did have Ruth Mbogo, policy and governance expert, Lydia Mathia, policy and governance analyst and advisor as well, Martina Swiga, advocate of the High Court. Thank you so much, ladies, for coming in this morning to have this discussion. All right, my name is Zainab Ismail. This is where we wind up. But in just a moment, your world will be coming right up with Winnie Lubembe. She's not joining me today, but Winnie will be coming up in a moment. Today is the World Eyesight Day. It's a very important conversation. You do not want to miss that. This is M Live. Have yourself a good morning and good day.